As Frum Yidden performing mitzvahs, we do everything in our power to ensure we are wearing the same tefillin as Moshe Rabbeinu and eating the same matzah as Rabbi Akiva did. Minhagim may vary, but the core mitzvahs don't change. This is a basic and fundamental tenet of our Yiddishkeit. We therefore trust in Chazal and our Messiah that every mitzvah we perform is executed in the manner that Hashem told Moshe Rabbeinu at Har Sinai. Over the millennia, various groups and individuals have sought to deviate from our Messiah and introduce changes to the way we perform our mitzvahs. But time and time again, they have ultimately faded into the collective dustbin of Jewish history. Our steadfast stubbornness has kept us on the straight and narrow throughout the generations.
It's a very good thing. Because Yidden don't want to change, that keeps us where we are. That keeps us strong. If we were to change every Montag and Donnerstag, to something that somebody all of a sudden discovered, we would never be able to keep up Yiddishkeit.
Innovation is automatically suspect.
So, if someone were to tell you that a mitzvah is being done improperly, or even that it can be done better, he would be met with a healthy dose of skepticism. Is he suggesting that he knows better than everybody else who are not troubled by his concerns? So now I know what you're thinking. Sure, we'd like to think we don't change, but of course there's been some change. Some change has always been accepted as an organic reality of the Frum community.
When it comes to tefillin, they weren't able to make it, they didn't have the technology to be able to make tefillin from gases. They used to make it from dakas, and now Baruch Hashem that we have better technology and better hydraulic systems to do it, so we could advance in Shmiras HaMitzvahs. If you have a way to advance Shmiras HaMitzvahs, why not? You can't lose out.
So what kind of alterations to our mitzvahs are okay, and which aren't? How can we tell the difference between a chumrah or a hiddur versus an addition that could lead to potentially dangerous practices? To be clear, this film is not about telling anyone how they should be noyeg. In fact, I think we can all agree that when faced with the question of how one should perform any mitzvah, one should ask his own shaila to his respected pasuk. But this isn't about paskening a shaila. It's about learning this sugya, and learning it with the same objective, critical thought as one would approach any sugya in Torah.
There are so many rayas that the tchelas that they have today is the real tchelas. On the other hand, people who are steeped in the Torah don't want to change the kutzei shel yud. So it's really an exciting sugya, and certainly should be developed and learned. And of course, you'll need Gedolei Yisrael to make decisions vis-a-vis the average Joe or Yossel, whether or not he wears tchelas. But the fact that Klal Yisrael is pining to see what they can learn about tchelas, to try to see if they can adapt in the minhagim, is an incredible statement about the Yama Nivchor. Not just willing yotzei to zayin, but finding out what's right and what's wrong. If the Messiah is no tchelas, it's no tchelas. If the Messiah becomes tchelas, we'll spend exorbitant amounts to get it. The beauty of Klal Yisrael, the hiddur of Klal Yisrael, is really projected and exhibited through the mitzvah of tchelas.
That being said, let's roll up our sleeves and learn a little bit about the mitzvah. The pasuk in Parashas Shlach tells us, "Daber el bnei Yisrael, v'yomarto aleihem ve'osu lahem tzitzis al kanfei vigdehem l'deresam v'nosenu al tzitzis hakanof psil techeles." So what do we know? Well, we know that if a person is wearing a four-cornered garment, he needs to put tzitzis on it. And those tzitzis are comprised of both chutei lavan and techeles, strings of white and of Tcheles. The Rambam tells us that these are not two distinct mitzvahs. It's one mitzvah with one purpose, to remind us of Hashem and His mitzvahs. Now, if a person can't obtain Tcheles, there's a machlokes amongst the Tanoim about whether he is still Yotze the mitzvah at all with just the white strings. Just about all the Rishonim paskin that a person fulfills the mitzvah of tzitzis with only white strings, and in Shulchan Aruch it's brought that way, halacha l'maisa. So, we can wear tzitzis with full confidence that although we are only wearing white strings on our tzitzis, we are performing the mitzvah exactly as the Torah prescribes. Or are we? It seems to be clear from the Tanoim to the Rishonim and the Shulchan Aruch that the reason why it's okay to wear white strings without tcheles is because we don't have access to the tcheles today. This assumes that if the tcheles was available, we would need to wear it. One thing is for sure, if a person has the true tcheles and chooses not to wear it, he is mevatel a mitzvah d'oraisa. Similarly, by tefillin, if someone has a shel yad and chooses not to wear a shel rosh, he is certainly yotze the mitzvah of shel yad, but he is still not yotze the mitzvah of shel rosh. In addition, the Beis Halevi and others say he is also transgressing Bal Tigra, the Isser of detracting a chelek of any of the mitzvahs in the Torah.
It's a chelek of the mitzvah. There's two parts to the mitzvah. There's the lavan and the tcheles. So if you take the mitzvah and you leave out one of those parts, one of those chalakim of the mitzvah, that's Bal Tigra.
But I guess we have nothing to worry about because we don't have tcheles today, right? You may have seen a guy in your shul wearing tcheles. You may have talked to people who wear it, but you don't really understand where they're coming from. You may think, why are they wearing tcheles? Klal Yisrael hasn't had it since, forever. Then you might think, is it our minhag to wear tcheles? I don't think so. Also, what if it isn't the right tcheles? I don't want to mess up my tzitzis, and tcheles requires us to have a chilazon. We don't even know what it is. Furthermore, the Medrash tells us that it's been nignaz, which seems to mean that it's concealed and no longer around. And doesn't it seem unlikely that after so many hundreds of years, after Chazal themselves seem to have said it's been hidden, isn't it unlikely that we've discovered this mysterious creature and been able to extract the precise dye necessary to make tcheles? And even if it is, and we could, who's to say that we should? So let's take a step back and take a closer look at tcheles. What do we know about tcheles? Besides for tzitzis, tcheles comes up numerous other times in Tanakh. Tcheles was also used for covering the Klei HaMishkan during traveling. Tcheles was used in all of the Big Day Kohen Gadol, and even in the Avneit, according to some. Tcheles is mentioned numerous times in Nach as a known expensive world commodity. What's special about the color of tcheles? It's interesting to note that the color blue is more unique than we may realize. While there are many natural colors of dye, there is almost no natural blue dye. So the clothing and objects that people used to own just weren't common to be blue in color. A piece of clothing dyed blue would in fact be pretty special. Let's take a look at the most famous reference in Chazal regarding the color of tcheles. The Gemara in Menachos, Daf Mem Gimel Amud Beis says, Tcheles doime liyam, v'yam doime l'rokia, v'rokia l'kisei hakavod. Tcheles is similar to the sea, and the sea is similar to the rokia, and the rokia is similar to the kisei hakavod. We also know that tcheles has to come from a chilazon. The Tosefta in Menachos says, Tcheles ein ksheira ela min achilazon, sheloi min achilazon, psula. Tcheles is only kosher from a chilazon. If it doesn't come from a chilazon, it is pasul. So, what is this creature that Chazal call a chilazon? We'll get back to this later. Okay, we've spent a few minutes discussing what tcheles is. But now let's talk a little bit about why we don't have it anymore. How did tcheles get lost? Well, we know that we used to have it. Even long after the Churban, the Gemara discusses making and using tcheles at length. So, what happened to it? Have we ever had anything that was forgotten to such a degree in halacha? Think about it. For centuries, Yidden were meiser nefesh to keep our mitzvahs, so it's unfathomable that something was just forgotten. And remember, we're not talking about just a minhag. This is a mitzvah saseh de'oraisa. And if the exact process for how to write tefillin and mezuzahs and even my bubby's tzimis recipe can be passed down flawlessly, how is it conceivable for us to have lost an integral part of a mitzvah that every single man performs every single day? Could it be the persecutions that Klal Yisrael has endured throughout the centuries?
Our persecution has yet to taken away such a fundamental mitzvah in any other area in the Torah.
Perhaps we can explain the mysterious disappearance of the Tcheles based on a Gemara. Let me explain. Now, the royalty took themselves very seriously. It shouldn't surprise anyone that laws were made that commoners cannot dress like royalty. In fact, one of the laws in the Codex Justinian, an ancient collection of Roman laws, mentions that if a person would be found wearing blue or Tyrian purple, he would lose his property and his head. No private person shall have the power to dye or sell purpura goods, silk or wool, which is called blata, oxyblata, and hyacinthina. And if anyone shall sell cloth of the aforementioned murex, he may know that he incurs risk of losing his property and his head. We actually have echoes of such a gzeira from the Gemara in Sanhedrin Daf Yud Beis Amud Aleph. The Gemara tells us that a message was sent to Rava saying, Zug b'mei Rakas, a pair of scholars came from Rakas, which is Tveria, and was caught by a nesher, a troop of soldiers. In their hands they carried things manufactured in Luz, which the Gemara explains is Tcheles. In the schus of Hashem and their schus, they came out in peace. This Gemara about smuggling Tcheles is one of the last records of Tcheles being used before it seemingly vanished. And more importantly, it implies that Tcheles was outlawed. It wasn't just accidentally forgotten, it was actually outlawed. And why was it illegal? Well, because the royalty wore it. The Ramban also points out, when discussing the Bigdei Kehuna in Parshas Tetzaveh, that Tcheles was the same material that the royalty wore, and that it was illegal for non-royalty to wear it. One of the things we know about the Tcheles is that it was very expensive. The cheaper and more accessible option was Kala Ilan, the indigo plant, which produced an identical blue dye, but there was one issue. It faded over time. So it wasn't an ideal dye for royalty to use. So, the Radvaz explains, when they figured out a way to make the indigo dye permanent and not fade, it replaced the more expensive Tcheles dye. It was the same color and quality, it was just easier and more convenient to produce. The royalty just didn't need the expensive Tcheles anymore. And so the Tcheles industry faded. Soon enough, no one was producing Tcheles from the Chilazim. There was just no industry for it, because even the non-Jews stopped utilizing it. So there was just no access to Tcheles anymore. So let's sum this up. We've established that the royalty who wore Tcheles subsequently made it illegal to produce the Tcheles, and people who were utilizing Tcheles found more inexpensive options to achieve the same end result of blue dye by using Kala Ilan, thereby obviating the need to produce Tcheles at all from the Chilazim. Now, if only we could determine what the creature was that the people used to create that royal blue. Okay, let's clarify when this happened. We mentioned the Gemara about Zug ba Meirakas, that Tcheles was smuggled due to its illegality. This means that in the times of Rava, Tcheles did still exist, but it was hard to obtain due to its illegality. The Medrash Tanchuma says, nowadays we only have the white threads of tzitzis, for the Tcheles has been concealed, nignaz, so we know that by then it was gone. And so Tcheles was lost, and as the Medrash says, nignaz, hidden. So, does that mean we can't find it today? Or perhaps this simply tells us that something rediscovered is more likely to be the Tcheles, but not that it can't be found anymore. From the Maril and others, it seems that the second option is correct, that the Chilazon can be rediscovered. They believe that Tcheles can be brought back, and one particular Gadol, the Radziner Rebbe, clearly took that possibility to heart. In 1887, Reb Gershon Henoch Leiner, the Radziner Rebbe, set out on a quest to rediscover the Tcheles. He was an absolute genius, authoring the Sidrei Taharis on Mishnayos Kelim and Ahalos, which is a recreation of the Gemara on Seder Taharis, and widely respected by the Gedolim of his generation.
You cannot talk about the Tcheles if you don't talk about the Baal Tcheles. Reb Gershon Henoch Leiner, Zatzal, the Rebbe of Rodin, he was the one who came out with the idea. He wrote 3 Sforim on the Tcheles. What he did was, he said it can't be that a mitzvah that was around just disappeared.
After studying the sources and even traveling to Naples, Italy for the better part of a year to study aquatic sea life, the Radziner Rebbe concluded that he had found it. He had found the Chilazon.
The Rambam says in Hilchos Tzitzis, in Perek Beis, Halacha Beis, Shusamen es atcheles, hu dag doime einoi le'ein atcheles, v'domoi shocho kidyoy.
The blood substance, when it comes out of the Chilazon, is shachur kidyoy, black like ink. He concluded that the common cuttlefish, a squid-like creature that expels a black inky fluid when in danger, commonly used in that era as pen ink, fit the description of the Chilazon that he had developed in a kuntris on the subject titled Sfunei Tmunei Choil.
And he came to the conclusion that that is the fish that was found. When he came back with the fish, now he said, now how we dye it?
The Radziner was a great Goyen, but he wasn't a dye chemist. It seems that he gave it to dye experts who added certain chemicals, turning the cuttlefish secretion into a blue color. This was based on the Rambam that says when you add certain additives or samemonin to the mixture, it will produce the dye. Once the Radziner perfected his Tcheles, he produced thousands of pairs of tzitzis. And while it wasn't commonly accepted, there were some Gedolim of the time that did wear them. Obviously, they also weren't too concerned about the Tcheles being nignaz until Mashiach.
Rabbi Yitzchak Ponovitcher, Reb Chaim Oizer Gonjitsky had a telescope with Tcheles, or Dina Tcheles. The Marsham had the Tcheles. He said we should bury with the Tcheles.
But Radziner Tcheles was, as we say, not so pashut. In 1913, Rabbi Yitzchak Isaac Halevi Herzog, who would later become the chief rabbi of Israel, revisited the topic, exploring the halachic and historical issues, as well as the scientific process of producing the dye. He corresponded with chemists and dye experts and ultimately concluded that the cuttlefish is not the Chilazon. Sure, the inky fluid of a cuttlefish can be turned into a blue dye, but that's not because of the cuttlefish secretion. Rather, because of the ingredients added to it and its subjection to intense heat. His research indicated that one could nearly use any organic compound to manufacture the dye, as long as the same process is applied to it. The dye that resulted from this chemical process was well known in his times and is still in use today, known as Prussian blue.
I know I have come through a taina that if the Baal Tcheles would be alive today, so he would change his theory. The Baal Tcheles had siyata d'shemaya to find the Tcheles. So we have to believe he had siyata d'shemaya to find the right Tcheles. To say that he had this, I have seen this written, he had the siyata d'shemaya to start the mitzvah, but some other professors, they were the ones to finish the mitzvah. I don't think that is the right way to look at things. I think it should be going after the Tcheles was done by the one who brought the whole Tcheles down to this world. and not to ignore the Regina Tchelis. You cannot wear Tchelis and ignore whatever the Baal Tchelis said.
Let's take a step back for a minute and take a look at how Chazal describe what a chilazon is. In Parashas Ekev, Perek Ches Pasuk Daled, the Pasuk says, Simlascha levolsa me'alecha, your clothing did not wear out upon you. It's well known that the Dor HaMidbar's clothing did not wear out. What is less known is the medrash that compares their clothing to the shell of a chilazon that grows with it, which would mean that a chilazon has a shell. Similarly, the Rambam tells us in Maseches Kelim that a chilazon is an aquatic creature that has a shell. And Reb Avraham ben HaRambam describes harvesting tcheles dye like cracking nuts open, which would also mean that a chilazon has a shell. So we know that the chilazon has a shell, but that's not quite enough to go on. There are plenty of creatures in the sea that have shells, so which one is it? Rashi and other Rishonim are very helpful in identifying what this shelled creature is. Rashi in Sanhedrin describes the chilazon as a toilas, a worm, as do many other Rishonim, such as the Rash and the Ravid on Teres Koyanim. So we have a worm with a shell. Do we know of an animal like that? A snail. This is precisely how the Geonim define the chilazon, a worm in a shell. In addition, Rashi and Rabbeinu Gershom describe the word chilazon as limtza, limetz in French, which means snail. We also find the word chilazon even today meaning snail in Middle Eastern languages, such as Aramaic and Arabic.
Halzono in Aramaic language. Halzono. Halzono. Halzono in Aramaic language. Halzono.
Halazon. That's the word in Arabic. Halazon is the whole thing in it. When it's without, it's called sadafeh.
So now that it seems we've determined that the word chilazon just means snail, which snail is the one that was used for producing tcheles? Perhaps the next step in our quest is to determine where the chilazon is supposed to be found. Well, we know from the Gemara where it can be found. The Gemara in Shabbos tells us that the chilazon can be found on the shores of the Mediterranean that were part of the portion of the Shevet of Zvulun, from the cliffs of Tzor to Haifa. We know that tcheles ve'argamon are also found by the Iye Elisha, which the Yerushalmi tells us is Greece.
We have sources on that in Greece. The biblical name in Tanakh called Iye Elisha was produced back then tcheles. And they have here, so you see Greece, there's a lot of islands, and the ocean goes in and out of the islands. The chazanis, they Africa have to be in like a rocky area. So if you go into the open ocean, deep in the ocean, you won't find them. They're always in a rocky area. So over here they have them a lot. And at Yisrael, B'yamim Mahem, Tzor v'Tzidon, in Lebanon, also, it's in a rocky area, in between the rocks. That's where we find them a lot.
So based on these sources, snails found in these locations, in Eretz Yisrael and Greece, could actually be the chilazon. Interestingly enough, we have a parallel description in ancient Greek and Roman sources of a blue dye derived from a marine snail. Aristotle, Pliny, and many others discuss a thriving industry of wool colored with a dye produced from the body fluid of a snail called the Murex trunculus, known as the purpura in Greek. In fact, the Murex is still known as the purpura in Greece even today.
This porphyra has a lot of color. You can do something someday. But I guess you use it.
This is a marine snail that contains in its hypobranchial gland a body fluid that was used in the ancient world for dye production. Murex-based dyes appear in the ancient literary record in the context of their role in the economy, their role in fashion, price controls on luxury items, and other things. It also appears repeatedly in the legal record in the context of the laws enacted banning the production of murex dyes for non-royalty. The ban was first enacted by the Emperor Nero around the time of the Churban of the Second Beis HaMikdash, and was reenacted numerous times over the course of the following centuries, with penalties that tended to get progressively harsher. Strabo, the Greek geographer and historian, saw the murex dyeing industry as the primary reason for the economic resurgence of Tyre, or Tsar. In fact, the shellfish dyeing industry was such an important part of the economy of Tyre that many of the coins minted there even depict a murex shell. There is even an extensive archaeological record of the murex dyeing industry. Remnants of factories used to produce the dye, containing millions of shells, have been found along the Mediterranean coast. Murex Hill on the coast of Sidon, or Sidon, is a pile 150 feet high and 300 feet long of murex shells that were used for dyeing. There were even blue cloths found in Eretz Yisrael dating back to the times of the Mishnah that have been shown to be dyed with the murex dye. So it's pretty clear that this murex was used for dye production in ancient times. Is it too unrealistic to assume that the murex of the historical record is the same as the chilazon of Chazal? Let's consider the options. If we were to assume that the chilazon and the murex are not the same, then there are in fact two different snails, one used to dye tcheles and the other used to dye some other blue dye. This would mean that there were two coexisting industries at the same time and in the same place that produced blue wool using a snail. If this were true, would the Tosefta say simply that tcheles ein kshera ela min achilazon, shaloi min achilazon psula? Tcheles is only kosher from a snail, and if it's not from a snail, it is pasul. When there are actually two different types of snails that dye blue, one of which is kosher and one not? Moreover, Chazal go to great lengths to warn against the use of fraudulent tcheles or kala ilon, a plant-based blue dye. If there was another blue dye made from a marine snail, wouldn't Chazal have warned us not to use it either? On a separate note, it's clear from Tanakh and Chazal that tcheles was not just a religious item, but a widely traded commodity. Why then, of the hundreds of references to murex dyes in the ancient literature, is there no mention of this other creature used to dye tcheles?
Just the very mitzias that the dyeing process that's described in connection to the murex is exactly the same as the dyeing process that is described in the Gemurah, benegaya to the chaluzin. The use was restricted at the same time as we have it documented that we ceased to have it. It's found mesilmedit soiv ad chayfe, just as it's documented in connection to the murex trunculus. It's called pirpira. The color is identical. They both can be mistaken for kala ilon, which is indigo. They're both expensive. They were both actually used by Chazal, and Chazal actually speak about it, and at the same time, simultaneously, the Chachmim Yisraelim talk about it having been used at that time. So, and both of them, most importantly, it is a chaluzah, and it is a snail, right? And you're going to tell me that all of that isn't compelling to say that this is the chaluzah? And after having all of that, if this would for some reason be pusel, don't you think the Gemurah would have to tell us that? So it's just totally unreasonable and illogical to draw any other conclusion. And that type of proof is conclusive proof in Halucha, as the Rambam says.
But the truth is, we can make the case more pashut. Whether or not you agree with the logic of the omission of Chazal of any other creature as a proof that the murex is the chilazon, You cannot argue with the simple truth that many Achrayim say it is the Purpura. The Shiltei Gibayrim, Yavitz, Chavis Yoyer, Radal, Rav Shamshin Raphael Hirsch, and the Toyafais Re'im are all clear that the Purpura is the Chilazon. As a matter of fact, it's not just these Achrayim that say that the Chilazon is the Purpura. This also seems to be evident from the Yerushalmi. In Maseches Brachos, the Rav Yah quotes Yerushalmi as translating the Mishnah that says, Bein Tchelis lekarsi, Bein Porphyrin liprisinan, between porphyrin, meaning the purpura dye, and prasinos, meaning leek green cloth.
When the Mishnah discusses the time of when you say Kriya Shema, it says that when you see the difference in the morning, when it starts getting light and you see the difference between Tchelas and Karti, then that's when the time of Kriya Shema is starts saying Kriya Shema. The Yerushalmi explains that Tchelas is Porphyra, which is quite compelling and in line with the Agdei Achrayim, that the Chilazon Tchelas is the Porphyra snail.
There you go. There you have a Yerushalmi translating Tchelas as the Purpura, which we know is the Murex snail. Now let's learn another Gemara in Menachos, Daf Mem Daled Amud Aleph, that provides some more details about the Chilazon used for the Tchelas. Tanu Rabbanan, Chilazon zeh gufay doime liyam, ubriyasay doime ledag, ve'oila achas l'shivim shana, uve'damay tsoivin tcheles, lefichach damav yikarim. The Chachamim teach, this snail, its body resembles the sea, in its form it resembles a fish, and it rises once every 70 years, and with its blood they dye tcheles, therefore it is expensive. Let's examine this Gemara. The Gemara says that the Chilazon resembles the sea.
And so the first thing you realize is you can't just walk along the beach and find snails. You're going to have to go into the water. And then when you go into the water, you're not going to just find the snails so easily. They're sfune tmune chol. They're treasures buried in the sand. And that's really what they are. They're between the rocks and between the sand, all along the bottom. And when you get there, you realize that even that you know that they're in between the rocks and sand, you can't see them so well, which matches really what the Gemara says, that their gufo domeh leyam, that their color is like the sea. Basically, that means that they're like everything else that's growing on the sea floor, and they're very hard to find.
Go out and look at the ocean. What color do you see the ocean is? The ocean fades from blue to green. The ones that I've seen in Eretz Yisrael, the ones that I believe are the way that I believe it appears most of the time, is that you'll see it to be very, very greenish, very much like the way that the ocean looks.
The Gemara says that this Chilazon resembles a fish. Keeping in mind that Chilazon means a snail, how can it be like a fish?
One of the things the Gemara says there is, Briyasai doime ledag. How do you have a snail that has the shape of a fish? Well, we have in the Murex trunculus, you see it very clearly. The Murex trunculus looks exactly like a fish. What's a fish? A fish has a head, a fish has a body, a fish has a tail. In the Murex trunculus, you see tavnus dioknoi of a fish.
The Gemara says that this Chilazon comes up every 70 years. What does this mean?
First of all, we have a Chivas Radvaz, which is actually brought by the Chidu, where he says that the phenomenon that it's oila achas l'shiv mishuna is no longer noyig, it no longer happens bisman hazeh. Misheguli Yisrael, from when the Yidden went in Gulis, this occurrence ceased. So that would be the simplest answer, because it's based on a Rishon. The Rishon actually, the Radvaz says so. Additionally, even without that, it's probably not a kasha anyway, because, when we say that something emerges once in 70 years, it means it emerges once in a blue moon, once in a lifetime. 70 years is a large number, and that is the kavun of the Gemara. It doesn't mean an exact. And we do find that shellfish, shells are swept ashore by storms, by hurricanes, by events that happen very seldom. And it happens very seldom, and it's very possible that this, in fact, does wash ashore. And it could happen once in a lifetime. You might find along a shore somewhere that a bunch of chalzonis washed ashore. There's no reason for us to believe that this phenomenon no longer exists, except for the fact that the Radvaz says it doesn't.
What about the fact that it's not oilim in Yam Achas B'Shiv Shanis?
It's like a number of different creatures. And all of a sudden there's
Swarm.
a swarm.
Oh, come on.
The Brisa finishes, from its blood they dye tcheles, therefore it is expensive. Indeed, the ancient historical sources tell us that the purpura dye was nearly as precious as gold. In 1988, Rev Eliyahu Tavger of Kiryat Sefer was able to create the blue dye from the murex snail. After Rev Tavger perfected the formula, others continued to produce the dye, and today, tens of thousands of pairs of tzitzis are being worn with tcheles strands made from this murex, believed to be the actual chilazon.
There's no question that had it not been for the Radzina Rebbe, we wouldn't be wearing tcheles, the real tcheles today. He was with his greatness. He was able to make the idea conceivable. So let's say he was wrong with the exact what he identified as tcheles, but he put this in people's minds. He made it a subject of conversation.
There are a lot of holes in the proofs that there's chilazon. The story about a man said, "What's green, hangs on a wall and sings?" So they know the answer. He says, "A herring." He said, "The herring is not green, so you paint it green. It doesn't hang on a wall, you hang it up. It doesn't sing, or it's missing one thing." It's a lot of the proofs about the chilazon are that way. It's not exactly green and the blue. It looks like blue. All the different simanim you find in the Gemara, they find an excuse. Their main proof is the fact that it was commercially used as a dye, and they find dyeing factories on the coast of Ashkelon or something near there, the coast of Tzor, and they assumed that must be chilazon since it was a dye that was used in those times. That doesn't prove anything. There could be another dye that we don't have records of.
What are we losing? In other words, what's the downside? There's no bracha being made on this. There's no downside. If there's no downside, what am I losing?
Tcheles is an integral part of the mitzvah of tzitzis. As such, I would think that it's appropriate for someone who's able to fulfill it as well.
I don't doubt that the murex may have been used for a dye. I'm not even questioning that. They seems to have the proof. But just because it was used for a dye, it doesn't automatically mean that that's tcheles.
But we have an argument in between the science and that what it's mashma and chazal that we will not find it. If you feel science is before halacha, so then you have a problem. And I will explain what I mean. I'm trying to explain that the question is from what point of view you're coming. When we have a question, and I'm saying I'm a shvache guy, kotten shebektanim, talmida talmidim, and I have a kasha in between science and the halacha, who I think is right? Again, for sure the Gemara, but who I, small little person, think? I'm embarrassed to answer. I will win the Gemara over the science.
It's a very hard zach to call a sugya, because a lot of it is scientific. It's not so much in Gemaras. There may be some small Muslim in Gemara, but you're not going to pinpoint, but it could be.
So it means that science is only proved because we don't have a different answer. We only found these shells, and that makes sense. That is the proof. In the minute that I will take out another fish that is proved, so science fell apart. So it's not really a proof.
The reason that I say that the murex trunculus is the chaluzan is primarily, firstly, because the Chavas Yuis says so, and the Shilta Geborim says so, and Rabbi Yankiv Emden says so, and the Radal says so, and the Tayafis Ra'aim says so, and Rab Shamshin Refuel Hirsch says so. And it seems that way from the Ramban ala Torah. So I would hardly call bringing rayas from all of these Gedoyle Olam scientific proof. I would say that's haluchic proof.
Tcheles was nignaz. Now, nignaz means it's hidden, it's gone. I mean, it's not going to be, you can't just say we discovered it, and who discovered it. It requires the Mashiach, actually.
This is something that, from piecing together all the information, this has to be it. If we're missing anything, it's some small, I would like to say insignificant, but it's some small detail that we're not understanding. I mean, this is the logical, not just logical, but it's staring us in the face. This animal was used for dyeing blue, and this is the only animal in the world that you're able to dye blue from. They used it in the ancient times, and we're using it now in the modern times. There's only one animal, a sea creature, that's a snail, that we know can be used for dyeing altogether, and specifically this species for dyeing blue. You can't get more certain than that.
To me, I'm as convinced that this is Tcheles as I'm convinced that the world is a globe, not flat. It's a fact.
I'm 100% convinced that we have the right snail. No question about it.
But I've heard about some kashas that I feel like we should be addressing. The Gemara uses a chilazin as a creature that you are chayiv for tzeda, capturing. Capturing a snail is easy, you just pick it up, because it moves at a snail's pace. So why would you be chayiv for its tzeda?
The Gemara says that there's an issa tzeda on a chalazin, and the Gemara in Beitzah says that if you can get it with one sweep, there's no issa of tzeda. There is no issa tzeda on a snail because it runs at a snail's pace. And you can, with one sweep, you can easily get it. So it's not possible there should be an issa tzeda. Therefore, I cannot believe that it is the chalazin.
What if you don't see it in the water, so you have to be tzodit with a net? So you just ask, how is it mishkachas law? That's how it's mishkachas law. It says when you tzod, it's not always nitzid v'yoymid. I'm sorry, I don't begin to hear it.
The truth is, if you have to use some sort of method, you can't just pick it up. It's 9 feet or 12 feet below the surface. You can't just walk and pick it up. You have to find some sort of trap to get it. That is sod.
If you need tachbuz to catch it, it's like someone throws a ball and it lands in a tree. And then if you take a ladder and you get the ball out of the tree, even though it's behind the leaves, are we going to say you're going to be over the Isab Tzeda when you take down the ball because you need tachbuz to get it? Because it's not easily visible from the ground, you have to get a ladder, you have to climb up. No, it's no tzeda because it doesn't move. So therefore there's no tzeda. This thing doesn't really move fast enough to be considered that it is tzeda. Then it doesn't matter how many tachbuz you need, it's not going to be, it's like a still object, like a ball, and it's not possible to have any tzeda.
And let me tell you another reason that this kasha cannot be a kasha. Because it says that choymet is a snail. Rashi ala Torah says that a choymet is a snail. Rashi in Chagige says that a choymet is a snail. The Radak says the choymet is a snail. The Chizkini says the choymet is a snail. A lot of Rishonim say the choymet is a snail. The choymet is one of the Shmoyne Shrutzim, that it says that if somebody is tzod, he's chayiv for tzayda. So if you're saying that a snail does not have tzayda, so you're saying that Rashi was wrong and all these Rishonim were wrong? So the kasha cannot be a kasha.
The Medrash Tanchuma writes, "Ve'achshav ein lanu ela lavan shehatchelas nignaz." So how can we claim to have it?
Because it was nignaz doesn't mean we'll never find it. I said I tried to be gonius my afikomer in every Pesach. I do a geniza. My kids usually find it.
It's not nignaz. It's sofron by human beings. What kind of silly thing is that? Nignaz means the measure. It was God made it be hidden. It was hidden, or the rabbis decided that had to be hidden with their divine Ruach HaKodesh. There's a reason for it. Why? That should be the first question. Why does it mean nignaz? Why nignaz? Why? Why was it nignaz? The answer is it's a sign of Hester
upon them.
Well, it's clear from the Gedolei HaPoskim and the Gedolei HaAchronim that it's not the intent of the Medrash, because we find the Maril, the Chem Shloima, the Oilas Tamid, and the Arz Chaim, they were all Choshesh Ladina that the Tchelis might come back. So obviously the Medrash did not mean that it cannot come back. And we also find Gedolei HaAchronim like the Ma'asham, the Itzum Panovich, and other Gedolim which were the Radzinas Tchelis. So obviously they didn't understand that the intent of the Medrash is that it was hidden and we can't find it.
But Chazal say it was Nignas. So if Chazal mean that it was Nignas, I understand the Maharil is mashma that maybe it wasn't Nignas, maybe it could be found. And maybe there are other, Radvaz may be mashma that it could be found, it's true. But Nignas definitely means that it was Nignas for a time. The Maharil holds maybe there will come a time where it will be found. Radvaz says there will come a time where it could be found. Possible. But Nignas, it doesn't just say it was Nevad, it doesn't just say it was lost. Nignas, who was Gainaz it? Who hid it? No person hid it. It's not like an Afikaiman. A person hides the Afikaiman, you say, I'm Gainaz my Afikaiman. Tchelis, if we say Tchelis was Nignas, unless some guy went around collecting all the Tchelis, all the Chilazans in the world, and put it away, Nignas is referring to the Bayrei Olam. If HaKadosh Baruch Hu was Geyser, something should be Nignas, it could be sitting on the table in front of me, and I won't see it.
Lamaisa, when it's all said and done, we just don't seem to have the support of the previous and current Gedolei Yisrael.
My Rebbe didn't have Shlomo Zalman Auerbach. My Rebbe Rav Neuwirth never had Tchelis. My Rebbe Yashiv writes in the Tshuva that we don't put on Tchelis. And here is the question. Rebbe Yashiv was machmer almost every chumrah in the world. My Rebbe Rav Shlomo Zalman knew all about science. If someone that brought science into the Torah in our generation is Rav Shlomo Zalman. He was the first one. And he did not put on Tchelis. My Rebbe Shmir Shabbos Kilchoso was known like a really educated person. He never had Tchelis. So first I do what my Rabbein do. So the question is what I do. I know there's a lot of Choshevet people that do wear Tchelis. A lot of Choshevet Talmidei Chachamim that put on Tchelis. I do what my Rabbein do.
I'm not a halachic expert, and I didn't go through Indian deeply. I just know that Shlomo Zalman and Gedolei Ador at that time did not accept this idea that this is Tchelis. They did not accept it. That's enough for me.
It's interesting. Most of the Gedolim that I'm familiar with, they did not wear any tchelis, even after this was discovered. They're not wearing tchelis. So why not? Why don't they say, what's the problem? If it is tchelis, so we're kind of mitzvah. If it's not tchelis, we didn't do anything wrong. So I think that this is it. We can't just go after the fads or whatever. Someone comes along and decides that this is what it's supposed to be when there is no convincing proof that this is, we don't have a Messiah on it. If we don't have a Messiah, so therefore we should not get involved with it unless we know for sure that this is what it is.
Well, there's no tshiva from any gudel which goes through the subject properly, like a tshiva would be written on any haluchidik subject. You know, for such a subject like this, it would have to be a lengthy tshiva because it's a lengthy discussion. There are a lot of aspects to it. There hasn't been anything written by any of the Gedolim against it. What there is Gedolim who don't feel that they're obligated to believe those people who did the research and say it is. If there would be a genuine shitta of a godel that you're not supposed to wear it, they would write it up and explain their position.
I actually asked Rabbi Scheinberg, and he said he wears a tchelis.
So someone that's not rogel and doesn't have experience to pascha by himself, I would suggest he should not put on tchelis. It's not something which someone should do from his own. He should ask his rav. Many rabbanim that went through the sugya would say to put it on. Some of the rabbanim would say he shouldn't.
I understand also there's many rabbanim who are wearing tchelis and keeping quiet about it, because like Grabowski told me, there's a limit how much a person is mechuyev to put himself out on a limb for this.
A lot of Gedolim have told their Talmidim that if you research this and you come to the conclusion that, let's say murex is the tcheles, then you should do it, but b'tzimra.
It's interesting to note, the last time I was in Eretz Yisrael, I was by one of the very great poskim in Eretz Yisrael, Moshe Morcha, Karp Shlita. He was extremely close to Rav Elyashiv. And I was with him, I noticed that he was wearing tcheles. And I asked him, did you speak to Rav Elyashiv about it? And he said, yes, he sure did. And I said, and Rav Elyashiv said, still, at this point, you should wear b'tzina, because still it wasn't as kabul by the Eilam. But I asked him, did Rav Elyashiv discourage you in any way? He said, no, he didn't discourage me. So it's interesting, despite that Rav Elyashiv wrote a tshuva many years ago about it, I don't know, I can't say myself, but I don't, it seemed like a much softer approach to the matter than I had understood was his attitude towards it.
There's a famous tshuva of Rabbi Yosef against it, where if you read over the tshuva, he never really directs his attention to the murex. He directs it in general to people trying to come up with, they know now where exactly the Mokum HaMizbeach and Har HaBayis is, or they now it's going to be Tcheles and then it will be something else. And in general, he was trying to keep away from that.
A few years ago, Ovi Moiri, my father, went into Reb Chaim Kanievsky to talk with him about Tcheles.
In the Rambam, in the Smag, in the Rich, can you nicht gemungen, dass Loch im Kleid. No, Nignas Bescheid, wie viel sind Nignas?
Michael, Michael.
Ihr seid מחויב, סון.
הוא כבר עושה כזה 3 שנים, הוא כבר עושה כזה יום ולילה, ברבי חיים.
הם בהצלוח.
אמן.
So, at the end, Reb Chaim Kanievsky's response was that to my father, he said, if you are really convinced that it's clear by you, you are mechuyev to wear it. So then my father says, no, if the Rav says that I have to wear it, so it's a big schus. So he says, he repeated, if you really convinced that you mechuyev al pidin.
Als der Rav hat mir gesagt, dass ich bin mechuyev, ist schon ein schus.
So obviously, Reb Chaim Kanievsky did not feel that if someone wears it, he's going against Das Torah.
We have different gedolim that have already, accepted it, are wearing it, are at least encouraging it. Like I said, Tzvi Weber himself does not wear tcheles, but anyone who asks him about wearing it, he says it's fine. It's a wonderful thing to do. It seems like it's for real, and you should go ahead and do it.
People that do want to wear tcheles, Tovalem Brocha, they want to wear it. They're allowed to wear it. Why not? If they hold that this is tcheles, it's very hard to say they hold, because they're dominant kashas on them. But at the same time, if people want to wear tcheles, Gesundheit, they're allowed to wear it.
Have no tightness whatsoever on anyone who wears tcheles. Ruba, the person is showing that he has yiras shamayim by wearing tcheles. Why? Hey, maybe it's so, and therefore I want to put it on. So he's a noyev mitzvahs. I have no tightness whatsoever on any yid who wears tcheles.
Before you say no one holds of it, ask your own rabbanim. That would be the first thing.
But it's looked at as a valid thing to do. Most people know about Rav Belsky as a Zechron Levracha, that he wore tcheles. He spoke about it barabim in his later years.
I had a conversation with Rabbi Belsky about his wearing tcheles, because I noticed the last few years of his life he started wearing tcheles, and I asked him about that because that was a chiddush to me, that he would start a new minig that his Rebbeim and his Rosh Yeshiva didn't do. And he said to me that after researching the halacha and what Chazal say about it, and the science that was presented to him about tcheles, he felt that beyond the shadow of a doubt, that the tcheles that comes from the murex trunculus is the true tcheles. And he felt that although he never wore tcheles and his Rebbeim never wore tcheles, but he told me that beyond the shadow of a doubt, he believes that that is the proper tcheles.
So you still hold that there's a possibility that the Murex is the Teos?
I hold it's further.
The desire to hold on to tradition is what's overriding.
And once we start changing Messiah, people are afraid. I always felt uncomfortable to be able to walk around with chelis when my father, my grandfather, who's eingesund, are not wearing it. If it's in any way, I'm better than you.
It's a tremendous nisayon. I mean, on the one hand, you know, I had mixed feelings. On the one hand, I would have wanted to because it's a mitzvah, and you know, I want to do it if it's a mitzvah. On the other hand, something inside me was hoping that it's wrong. I'm ashamed to say, because it's a mitzvah and I shouldn't have wanted that. But something inside me was hoping that it's wrong, because I knew that if it's right, it means I'm going to have to wear it, I'm going to have to stand out, and I'm going to be lelag v'lekelis to everybody. And there were a lot of people who were aware that I was researching this, and they were telling me, the roof is not putting on tchailis. People in my kehillah, no way, it's not happening. And I knew there'd be pressure, and there'd be a tremendous stigma attached to it. Even in my own family, I was worried. But the underlying thing is that it's just people have an aversion to do something which is so, stands out and so unusual, and so it just goes against the nature and the grain of the fabric of our tradition in every area.
Klal Yisrael is going to it takes time for them to get used to a new idea until they chew it over and mull it over and think it over and talk to this one and talk to that one, and it's discussed in the Beis Medrash, it's discussed with the Gedolim say their ideas back to the lower Beis Medrash, and the Beis Medrash discusses again with the Gedolim. It takes time for the whole subject to congeal until they would be ready to deal with it, and that's the process I believe that we're in the middle of right now.
I think that the answer is really what Rav Shafran, who is in Bnei Brak, who actually I saw a letter written by him pretty strongly pro the Tchelis issue. And he explained that the concept of Messiah and the concept of not initiating new things is a very strong koyach in halacha too.
I personally feel that Klal Yisrael didn't pick it up yet. It's just a question of time. More and more people will pick it up slowly.
It's a relatively new thing, and initially there's going to be resistance to it, and the more it becomes accepted by various people, the more open the traditionalists will be to it, and if it stands the test of time, I think it will ultimately be accepted.
Definitely seems compelling. There are definitely opinions that feel very compelled to feel that it is not the right tchelis. But I think eventually the tzibur of Klal Yisrael, in Lo Neviim Hein B'nei Neviim, it'll come out one way or the other.
At least there should be an awareness that there is this possibility. Consider it, think it over. It's a serious subject. It should be taken seriously.